Hey guys, this is Devin here with Hillbilly Networks again. Today I wanted to talk to you about DHCP. DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. As you'll see here in the picture, we have a DHCP client and a DHCP server. And right there in the middle at the bottom, we have a negotiation that goes on between those two. Before I start to cover those, I do want to address that there are two different types of IP addresses. There isn't just dynamic, there's also static, which is another option. I'll cover that later in the video. But another thing I'd also like to address is the fact that this says DHCP server. A DHCP server is going to be something that you actually see in existence primarily in enterprise or large networks where there's actually a physical DHCP server separate from the router, or maybe a virtual one separate from the router. Traditionally in a home or a small business, you're going to have a router that you purchase that has all that built in. It's going to have a software inside there that will actually distribute the IP addresses automatically within the router. But for the lesson today, we'll pretend that we're talking about more of an enterprise network environment. So DHCP client is talking to the DHCP server. When that DHCP client, being a PC, a laptop, a phone, a tablet, whenever it first attempts to connect to the network, whether it's Wi-Fi or Ethernet, it's going to send out a DHCP discover. When it sends that out, it's eventually going to reach a DHCP server if there's one on that network. That DHCP server is going to send a message back to you, the client, offering you an IP address. At that point in time, if you want that IP address, if your computer, which if you've been asking for it, your computer will automatically want it for you. It's going to send a request back, and it's basically saying, okay, I got the offer of the IP address, I like it, I want it, please give it to me. And at that point, the server's going to send a message back to your computer again saying, okay, I got the message saying you want this IP address, that you're cool with it. Okay, I'm going to mark you down for it, and your lease time is 3 days or maybe 3 months, whatever the setting is on your DHCP configuration settings. I say lease time because that IP address is set to belong to you for a specific duration of time. Once that lease expires, more than likely you will get the same IP address again if you remain connected to the network during the time that lease expired. However, if you were disconnected from the network when the lease expired and the DHCP server offered that IP address to someone else that connected after that point in time, well, obviously at that point that IP is used by another computer now. But most of the time, if you have a network where computers stay connected to it all the time, maybe they're physical PCs, desktops, and they stay on most of the time, usually it's going to have a preferred IP address, so that whatever IP address was given to that computer the first time, you can actually go into command prompt and type in ipconfig/all, and you'll see your IP address. And if you have DHCP on your network, it's going to say preferred IP address. And that's basically your computer saying, hey, this is what we were given, we've had this for a while, we would like to keep it. And again, if you stay connected to the network continuously, when that lease time expires, if you're still connected at that point in time, more than likely you're going to get to keep that IP address, and it's not going to change. But again, disconnect, that address goes up for offer, and it may be given to something else. So that's pretty much the process on that. Another thing that you can have configured on DHCP is an address reservation. That means that you can actually write into the DHCP server or your home router, small business router, that this specific IP address, we do not want to give it to anyone. It is reserved for, say, the Xbox. And then the only thing on the network that can use that IP address is one that actually types in that IP address statically within that computer or the Xbox. I say that because I have an Xbox, and that's, I have an IP address that's reserved for it. Next, I'll go ahead and touch on static. A static IP address is generally a network that has DHCP turned off, and if you connect a computer to the network, you're not going to get an IP address. You will have to manually type in the IP address in your IPv4 properties in your computer. Furthermore, you would actually have to know a usable IP address, what the right subnet is, what the right subnet mask is, and the gateway, and you're going to need to know the primary and secondary DNS, because if I remember correctly, in Windows, whenever you type in the IP address manually, statically, in other words, it requires that you type in the DNS servers as well. And as I've talked about in my previous videos, you could technically use Google or Cloudflare's or somewhere like that if you didn't know the DNS server on the network you're connected to. But that's static, and that is generally going to be controlled by, an IT administrator at the company is going to have a block of IP addresses that's available for use, set up and configured on the router, on the LAN, on the local area network. And as long as you knew what was used and what wasn't used, and what the subnet mask, the gateway, all those different things, you would be able to connect to that network. Some would argue that that's more secure. I would not say secure, so to speak, but it does offer another layer of difficulty, I would say. It makes it to where you would have to do a lot of guessing, or know that block of information. But in all honesty, it would not be hard to guess that. So again, that's why I say that's not necessarily a security layer in itself. It's just a layer of difficulty maybe for some. If you guys have any questions or anything about DHCP, or if you think of anything else that you want me to make a video about, please let me know and leave that in the comments. Thanks, guys.